Hey there, Dr. Alan Christianson here with you, and this is a topic that's been near and dear to my heart. I would love to rename adrenal fatigue. So is that incongruent? I had an adrenal fatigue summit that I hosted recently. Evan Brand, great guy, we put this on, wonderful experience. Well, you know, I put a lot of thought into using that term for the summit, and Evan and I had this discussion, as I did with many of my guests. So it's a term we identify with. You know, we think about having adrenal fatigue, and it's an important placeholder, I think. If I had a magic wand, we could start afresh and think about a different term. And to me, it's more than just an academic difference. It's not just, well, I'm right, he's wrong. No, I think that words shape our perceptions and they shape our actions. So when we think about the adrenals being fatigued, that would lead you to a different set of actions than it would if you thought about your body being in a state of dysregulation. It's not that something is broken and it can't make a part that you need. It's more so that your body's intentionally slowing this. So they're not fatigued, but they are fatiguing you. And I want to go deep and make sense of that distinction. So there's this concept of the Hypothalamic-Pituitary-Adrenal Axis. They work together, also called the Hpa Axis. And the data has shown that its integrity is huge relative to our health. So in the case of an acute stressor, this axis acts and moves our body into a fight or flight response state, which can pull our butt out of the frying pan if we're in trouble. You know, it's a useful thing in some circumstances. But the problem is if we have major stressors early in life. If you've not seen the work about the ACEs that I've talked about, please Google ACE and my name and see some of those papers. So early childhood traumas, basically horrible things that happen early along in life. They have huge effects upon changing our Hpa axis. When we have traumas in early life, in the future, the stressors are responded to more than they need to be. And your body has this calibration, so to speak, that if out of the gate, bad things happen, adverse childhood experiences, thank you. If right out of the gate, bad things happen to you, your whole system's calibrated to always be ready for horrible things to happen. And things that are small events can trigger a huge stress response. So that's the Hpa axis. And the data is strong that really predicts health and disease and happiness and all sorts of important things. And also when that's off, that can be the source of many symptoms, you know, fatigue and all these things we've called adrenal fatigue. It's really about Hpa dysregulation. And I'll talk more about what's happening there. So adrenal fatigue implies that your body wants them to make cortisol, but they can't. They're worn out. They made too much cortisol. They cannot make any more. They cannot sustain the cortisol needs. And this concept was really brewing in the late 90s. Before then, however, even, there was there was a book called Safe Uses of Cortisol. And Dr. Jeffries talked about how many that had these ongoing symptoms often had low cortisol, and they felt better if they took cortisol. And I think that idea, which came from early research on synthetic versions of cortisol and prednisone, came together into this concept of adrenal fatigue. Dr. James Wilson wrote a really good book, I would say, in which he talked about ways to help this condition. The disservice, I would argue, though, was that the idea was promulgated that this condition arises because the adrenals are weakened. And that does happen in a different, rarer context. That's Addison's disease. So Addison's disease is a Hashimoto's of the adrenals. You know, Hashimoto's of the thyroid, your immune system attacks your thyroid and just busts it up. And it doesn't have enough parts left to make these blocks your body needs. Now that happens with Addison's to the adrenals. Your immunity damages them, and they have no more tissue left to make adequate amounts of adrenal hormones. So in that case, there are measurable adrenal antibodies for most people, the same way many with Hashimoto's have measurable thyroid antibodies. Not all, different topic I won't go into. But there's also a higher level of ACTH. Just like with thyroid disease, TSH gets higher, not always through the roof, but a little higher at least. But that's more pronounced because Addison's is much more of an all or nothing than Hashimoto's is. Hashimoto's can smolder, be very real, very serious, but the gland isn't really killed. Most with Addison's, it progresses fast. It starts up eating away at the gland, and then it just goes and takes it all out. So it's typically more of a progressive disease. And because of that, The brain is telling these adrenals, hey, you guys, I need cortisol, you're not making it, get to work. And your brain's yelling at your adrenals. That yelling is ACTH, adrenal corticotropic hormone. That's pituitary telling them to work. And there should be some of that because they don't work otherwise, they goof off. But when that's through the roof, we know that they are not keeping up with their quotas. So that's adrenal fatigue, but that's Addison's. That's a few people per million. It's not common. Whereas what we've called adrenal fatigue, this HPA dysregulation, that's perhaps the majority of modern adults. It's a big thing. It's serious to our health, and it's very prevalent. To whereas Addison's is also serious, but not prevalent. Not many people. So in the case of HPA dysregulation, the artist formerly known as adrenal fatigue, ACTH levels are actually low. So that's the big distinction. We've got low cortisol both with Addison's over here, I'll put it over here, and then adrenal fatigue over here. So both can have low cortisol. But in the case of Addison's, you're going to see high ACTH because your brain is saying, I don't want low cortisol, I want higher cortisol, but you can't do it, so I'm going to yell at you. But in the case of what's been called adrenal fatigue, you'll see low ACTH. So here's what's going on behind the scenes. The brain, really the pituitary and hypothalamus, they're saying we should have lower cortisol. This body has been through enough stressors, enough traumas to where I need to rein in your energy levels. I need to slow you down and let you give me time to recuperate. Make you not do as much so we can heal up. So that's where I say that the adrenal fatigue, no, they're fatiguing. The body meant to do that. It's a different strategy. So if it were solely a matter of not being able to make cortisol, I'd prescribe cortisol all day long. That'd be the reason, that'd be the cure. Ideally, we could find some way to fix it short of that, and you can heal them up to where they didn't need to take it. But in the short term, if there's a deficit of cortisol, give some cortisol. But that's not the problem. There's low cortisol, but it's not because the body can't make it. It's because the body doesn't want it. So that's the big difference. Now, with that in mind, you would go about doing different things. Again, over here, if the adrenals are fatigued, you would give cortisol. You would give herbs to keep cortisol in the body longer. You would think about it in those ways. Over here, you need to repair, you need to rest, you need to help the body become more cortisol sensitized. You need to heal this whole Hpa axis. And the nice thing is that many of the things talked about as being adrenal fatigue remedies are things that help with this axis. Some are not. But the more we can focus on this understanding, the more we can move you out of this. The other beautiful distinction is that seeing it as what it is, what's really happening, it's a more positive prognosis. It's a happier outcome. This is stuff you can heal. This is stuff you can do better from, you can resolve. This broken adrenal thing, not as easy. You can manage it, but you can't so much make it go away. So it can get better. Hypothalamic-Pituitary-Adrenal dysregulation, and this is also the source of the contention between the alternative docs and the conventional docs. You ask any endocrinologist about adrenal fatigue, they're going to roll their eyes, or worse, or maybe they'll be more polite and more diplomatic about it. They don't believe in it. And the drawback is many of the things couched as adrenal fatigue are very important considerations. The things that would cause that or things that would resolve that are huge. One paper showed that cortisol cycle being off in a way that is not Addison's and not Cushing's, but is purely dysregulation, is a stronger predictor of death than smoking status is. So yeah, this is a real problem. This affects your health in significant ways. And there are anchors that can improve it. There's things you can do that can help with it. But when you look at medical research, they all fall under the heading of HPA dysregulation or HPA dysfunction. There's no papers on adrenal fatigue. So that's the confusion, that's the contention. So if we could drop that term, move in this term, everyone would be happy. We'd all get along, we'd all be in agreement. And we could also be getting all of our oars heading in the right direction. We wouldn't be confused about strategies that are not going to be helpful. So I'll use the word adrenal stress as a bit of a compromise because people are thinking about their adrenals and it's more of a stressor, but I've not embraced the term adrenal fatigue for these reasons. And I made some exceptions because the public thinks about it that way, but really this is HPA dysregulation. So thanks for going with me on that rant. I think it's important, but take great care of your adrenals in any way. We'll talk again really soon. Bye-bye.